Hello everybody, I'm Luiz Eduardo Oliveira, professor of the Federal University of Sergipe, and I'm going to talk about the Marquis of Pompal and the English, diplomacy, literature, and public instruction in the Pombaline period. In might of the political discourse of the pre-Pombaline intellectuals, during the reign of Dom João V, such as Alexandre de Gusmão and Dom Luís da Cunha, it is notable the destructive character which is attributed to the English alliance that had subjected the Portuguese nation to the humiliation of depending on England even to the necessary cereals for their subsistence. According to Kenneth Maxwell, in the first half of the 18th century, only Holland and Germany had overcome Portugal as consumers of the British exports. And only in the critical moments of the 7 Years' War, the British ships were below 50% of its total number in the port of Lisbon. The French ambassador, Etienne François, the Duke of Choiseul, wrote 5 years after the earthquake of 1755 that Portugal had to be considered a British colony. Azevedo, in turn, says that Portugal, after the Methuen Treaty, became the most excellent British colony. Its commerce was monopolized by the British, who became very rich in Port or Lisbon, but they were also present in other professions, such as coopers, cobblers, tailors, and hairdressers, in a way that the immigration encompassed every kind of people, since the bankrupt British until the runaway Irish. Besides, with the intense production of Brazilian mines, the cash was scarce, once the coins with the effigy of Dom João V were more common in England than the ones with the effigy of the King George I on it. Francisco Calazans Falcon, in a famous book published in 1982 about Pombal and his epoch, or the Pombaline epoch as he says, classifies the Pombaline writings in 7 thematic groups. The first one, according to the author, is composed of the writings about the Anglo-Luso economic relations and covers the period from 1738, the year the Marquis of Pompal arrived in London as a diplomat during the reign of Dom João V, until 1778, when, after the death of Dom João V and his fall of the ministry, he defended himself from his political opponents. In a long letter of January of 1741, addressed to Marco Antônio de Azevedo Coutinho, Pombal defended the maintenance of the historical alliance between the two kingdoms because, according to him, the Treaty of Methuen of 1703 was not the main cause of the ruin of the Portuguese economy, but the ambition, greed, and superb of the English, who envied Brazil and were considered the tyrants of commerce. It seems that with this document, Pombal inaugurates the Portuguese official Anglophobic discourse, which mythifies England as the incarnation of evil. De Relação dos Gravames, in turn, was sent to Lisbon in 1741. Here, Pombal says that the British were not bloodthirsties, but looters who want to be the conquerors of the world. They were also a part of a complot or a conspiration to ruin and destroy every foreign who dared to oppose their interests. His economic writings, in spite of being peculiar, to say the least, have an unquestionable importance in the history of the Portuguese economic thought, for his official and particular correspondence deals with 2 important themes for the context of the time: his rejection of the military aid of England in the conflict with Spain because of the colony of Sacramento, and the universal presence of the Jews, who were bankers, traders, lawyers, and physicians in countries like England and Holland, whither they took all their wealth. Pombal was worried because many Portuguese Jews in Brazil and in Spanish colonies would support the British, resentful of having been expelled from their own country, what took him to refer, as a minister, to a supposed international Anglo-Jewish monopoly. Most of his educational reforms more than an organized or systemic structure, were derived from the practical necessities of the context, so that he was kind of obliged to introduce enlightened elements or concepts in many of his writings, be them official reports, legislative, or epistolary. The case of the teaching of English. In spite of mythifying England as an incarnation of evil to Portuguese economy and prosperity, Sebastião José de Carvalho Melo, in his writing produced during the time he was a diplomat in London, manifested certain fascination by the commercial and maritime development of the English, as well as by the simplicity, flexibility, and efficiency of the system of their manufactures. This was the motivation of the Statutes of the Commerce Class published in 1759, as well as of the Class of Seamanship created in 1762. An important aspect of the discourse related to the creation of the commerce classes is the necessity of making this profession dignified both to the nobleman and the emergent mercantile bourgeoisie, detaching it from commoner activities. The intention was to form the perfect trader. Although his initiatives had to face many economic and political obstacles, the fact is that they began an unprecedented movement to the institutionalization of the commercial activities in Portugal. After his fall, some other similar institutions were created, such as the Academia Real de Marinha e Comércio da Cidade do Porto in 1803, according to whose program there were teachers of French and English. In his Escritos Econômicos de Londres, he had already called the attention of the Portuguese for the importance of learning the English language, once the lack of people on the ports who could understand English caused terrible losses to the kingdom. That is why he says in those documents that a escola de língua inglesa was necessary in Portugal. The commercial relations between Portugal and England provoked the development of the teaching of English and of Portuguese as a foreign language. It was a common discourse in the preface of the grammars and dictionaries published during the period, such as the Gramática Anglo-Lusitanica Lusitano-Anglica, published in 1731 by Jacó Castro. Its main objective, according to the author, was due to its great use in commerce, a língua inglesa. So it was a pioneer book directed to English learners of the Portuguese language as well as to Portuguese learners of the English language. In 1768, Antônio Vieira Transtagano published in London a new Portuguese grammar, and in 1773, the same author published a dictionary of the Portuguese and English language in two parts, in whose preface he affirms that the English language was necessary to every nation that had business with England. Similarly, Gramática da Língua Inglesa ou A Arte de Falar com Propriedade e Correção o Idioma Inglês, published in 1779 by Agostinho Neri da Silva, was published with the same purpose. An exception was André Jacó, a British mason who lived in Lisbon, in his Gramática Portuguesa e Inglesa, published in 1793, for he emphasized the importance of learning English not only because of commerce, but also because of the British writers and philosophers, such as Bacon, Newton, Locke, Pope, and Milton. In the beginning of the 1960s, the British had already noticed the true aim of the Pombaline economic legislation, what made Pombal omit the treatises when he asked England for military help. To the command of the English troops, Pombal indicated Lord Tyroly, who had many sons who were born in Portugal, but he was substituted by Wilhelm Graf von Schaumburg-Lippe, George I's grandson by an illegitimate descendancy. He stayed in Portugal the next year to help in the project of reforming the Portuguese military structure. As we have already said, it was under the Pombaline ministry that living languages, that is, modern foreign languages, were for the first time the subject of legislation, and their knowledge was indicated and then demanded in establishments destined for military instruction, as it can be seen in the letter of law of March the 7th, 1761, with which the statutes of the Royal College of the Nobles were published. The plan of studies of the new institution brought some news, because in addition to the usual subjects of the teaching of humanities, Latin, Greek, rhetoric, philosophy, theology, some elements of mathematics, astronomy, and physics were present, and the study of the French, English, and Italian language was recommended. The statutes of the Royal College of the Nobles were enthusiastically received, especially by the General Director of Studies, Dom Tomás de Almeida, who took an active part in the project, and in the same year of the publication of the statutes sent several copies to all the governors and commissioners of Brazil. According to Teófilo Braga, the letters on the education of youth, published in 1760 by Ribeiro Sanches, originated from this correspondence with the Principal de Almeida, General Director of Studies, in which the Portuguese physician proposed the Royal Military School of Paris, established in 1751, as an ideal model that could be imitated in his country. The Royal College of the Nobles would have been inspired by his ideas. However, the functioning of the institution, at least until 1772, when the University of Coimbra reform abolished the teaching of mathematics in the college, seems to have been marked by failure, with French and English teachers being hired only in 1785. Amongst the causes listed by Rômulo de Carvalho are the deficiency of administration, the plan of studies not adapted to the age of the school children. 1 year after the publication of the statutes, a gramática inglesa ordenada em português, written by a military man, Carlos Bernardo da Silva Teles de Menezes, and dedicated to Dom José I, was published. According to the author, who had produced the book specially for the new institution, the main objective of the teaching of English was the knowledge about the great writers, something which was necessary to every cultured nation, especially to Portugal, with whom the English had so much in common, given the commercial relations between the two kingdoms. Thus, the teaching of foreign languages in Portugal was instituted in the context of the Pombaline reforms of public instruction. In the syllabuses of military education establishments, the touchstone is the development of mathematical sciences, important for the formation of the perfect military, who would be able and instructed to deal with fortifications, bombings, and tactics of war, as well as with architecture and civil construction. Its consecration as an academic course in 1772 further highlights its important role in studies, be they preparatory or superior. Accompanying its process of institutionalization are the living languages, whose study allowed access to what was published on the subject in foreign countries, especially in France and England. As Laerte Ramos de Carvalho, who wrote an important work about the Pombaline reforms in education in 1978, in fact, the second edition dates from 1978, but it was published in 1951, the first edition. So he affirms that the reform of the University of Coimbra constitutes the crowning of the pedagogical measures practiced by the cabinet of Dom José I since the secularization of the missions of the Grão-Pará resulted from the law of the Directory dated from 1757. The letter of Roboration of 1772, which chronicles all the episodes concerning the creation of the Board of Literary Providence and the composition of the historical compendium, created two new courses, philosophy and mathematics. To both of them, modern foreign languages were recommended. His Anglophobia, which was shared by many intellectuals of the period, did not prevent many Anglophile discourses and manifestations in Portugal, even because, among the European philosophers, there was a strong admiration of the English liberal institutions. Besides, the British government searched to face France not only economically and politically, but also through the propagation of the English language, although many read English literature through French translations. During the Pombaline period, the novelty was the appearance of periodicals of instruction and recreation in the style of The Spectator by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. It inaugurated an era of essayistic and literary reviews which published poems, tales, and novels. There were many texts related to religion and science, quoting authors like John Wycliffe, Locke, and Newton. Newton's ideas in Portugal reverberated among the oratorians like Frei Manuel do Cenáculo Vilas Boas, an important character in the Pombaline reforms of education, adapted Newtonian principles, and, when he was the president of the Real Mesa Censoria, an institution of censorship created in 1768, he released books which had been prohibited by the Inquisition, such as Pamela by Samuel Richardson and Essays on Human Understanding by Locke. As for literary criticism, the translation of Boileau's Arte Poética in 1697 by Dom Francisco Xavier de Menezes, quarto conde da Ericeira, and the creation of literary academies are witnesses of the movement. The controversy provoked by the publication of Verdadeiro Método de Estudar by Antônio Verney in 1746 generated a series of articles, pamphlets, and books condemning or supporting the author. The second edition of Arte Poética by Cândido Lusitano in 1769 was dedicated to Pombal, then Conde de Oeiras, hailed as hero of the muses and object to be praised by the poets, something which was well observed by the Brazilian poet Basílio da Gama. Laerte Ramos de Carvalho, who was already mentioned, concludes his pioneering study affirming the absolutism and enlightenment of the Pombaline reforms of public instruction, since the Crown claimed for itself a task that until then was in the hands of the ecclesiastics, and the programs and directives of the reform were presented as authentic expression of modern thought, although in other passages it has attempted to relativize this enlightenment by defining it as eclectic and reformist or regalist or paradoxical, as Kenneth Maxwell says. Falcon, who was also already mentioned, is exhaustive in identifying the enlightened character of the Pombaline legislation, which finds vocabulary and thought forms typically illustrated, justifying reformist measures in sharp contrast with positions set over a long tradition in a long period of time. Perhaps this is the main paradox of the Pombaline Enlightenment, the union between Christian faith, the monarchy, and the modern state, which are responsible for triggering the discursive strategies necessary for the imaginary construction of the Portuguese nation. In the case of the Pombaline reforms, the discourse of its legislation appropriates religion to place it at the service of the state, of the school, and of the Portuguese nation. Thank you very much.